Okay, not quite here. Let's see. Okay. There we go. Okay, the book of Job. One of those very rarely understood books. As a matter of fact, in my growing up years, I've heard the book of Job preached on quite a few times, where they preach on the first 2 chapters and the last chapter and skip everything in between. How many of you have ever heard a sermon like that? I kind of thought so. So, today what we're going to do, or this evening, we're going to look at what about chapters 3 through 41. Okay, the book of Job has been a very fascinating study for me over many years, and particularly recently, as you might imagine, we've had renewed thoughts about how it might work out and what it means. But I'd like to begin by talking about Job and his friends. We already know the story. As a matter of fact, we know chapter 1 and 2. I'm not going to repeat that because everybody knows that. Chapters 1 and 2 and 42 are what we call the frame. It's a frame narrative. A frame narrative is a device where you have this frame and then the actual story takes place in the middle. Okay, so most preachers just preach the frame and they never preach the picture. Okay, so we're going to preach the picture. This is actually a picture by William Blake, who was an English artist in the 1700s, I believe. And so you have there Job and his friends. You see his wife on the left and his 3 friends pointing their fingers at him, which is pretty typical of what people think about the book. As a matter of fact, it's pretty true. Now, Job, in his very first plea, the first thing that Job says when his friends have all gathered and he waits the week till he finally can bring himself to talk, he says this: "Why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb?" That sounds like a real positive thing to say, doesn't it? Why is light given, and these are excerpts from this first speech that he makes. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden and whom God has hedged in? For the thing I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. I am not in ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, for trouble comes. In other words, Job's been sitting around for years afraid that something bad was going to happen. Everything seemed to be going too well for him. And then suddenly everything happens and he wishes he could die. Or he wishes he had been a miscarriage or just died the moment he was born. And so things look kind of bleak for him right there. And this is really kind of stark. This is really painful. And then this friend Eliphaz comes along in chapters 4 and 5. In his first speech, I call Eliphaz the mystic, and I'll tell you why. Because Eliphaz has had this experience. He's had a vision. Okay. And here's what he said. "Now a word was secretly brought to me, and my ear received a whisper of it, in disquieting thoughts from the visions of the night. Then a spirit passed before my face. The hair on my body stood up. Then I heard a voice saying, 'Can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can a man be more pure than his Maker? If he puts no trust in his servants, if he charges his angels with error, how much more those who dwell in houses of clay?'" Now this is interesting. Eliphaz has this vision. We don't know where it came from. We don't know who did it. But he believes it's from God. And he believes that basically what happened when he had this experience was now he's got everything figured out. He knows what the problem is. And that is that nobody can be good enough to please God anyway. So we just have to relax and sort of figure out how to muddle along. So he makes this statement. And he repeats this vision in another place throughout the book. And Eliphaz doesn't help Job a bit. Matter of fact, when Eliphaz is done Job speaking, Job says this: "Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant me the one thing that I long for, that it would please God to crush me, that he would loose his hand and cut me off. To him who is afflicted," now he talks about his friends, "to him who is afflicted, kindness should be known by his friends, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. My brothers have dealt deceitfully like a brook, like the..." And then he talks to God and he says, "Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am a burden to myself?" So Eliphaz doesn't help Job at all. As a matter of fact, Job sinks even deeper He even more dreads what's going on. It says he would like not just to be not born, God just crush him. And that's pretty severe. That's pretty bad. And he points out this thing that I think is very interesting in verse 14. To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. He's basically saying, even if I'm a reprobate, you ought to be nice to me. Okay, even if I'm a plain old rotten sinner, couldn't you be a little bit nicer to me? Because you are my friends, you know. So he gets pretty tense about this. The arguments between these guys get really tense. Then Bildad comes along, and Bildad does his speech in chapter number 8. And he's what I call the traditionalist, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And Bildad says this: if you would earnestly seek God and make your supplication to the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, surely now he would awake for you and prosper your rightful dwelling place. Though your beginning was small, yet your latter end would increase abundantly. For inquire, please, of the former age, and consider the things discovered by their fathers. Will they not teach you and tell you and utter words from their heart? Behold, God will not cast away the blameless, nor will he uphold evildoers. He will yet fill your mouth with laughing and your lips with rejoicing. Now this is interesting because this is basically a pretty good statement. Bildad basically says, listen, God knows what's going on. He can straighten things out. If it's sin, he'll punish you. But if you really seek God, he'll restore you. And so he's pretty nice. And as a matter of fact, once Bildad's done, Job says this: truly I know it is so. But I've got another question. And this is the thing that's interesting about Bildad. As soon as Job goes past his first question, Bildad doesn't know what to do. And it's evident that as soon as Bildad answers his first questions, he runs out of answers. And this is why I call him the traditionalist. He's got the right answers to start out with, but he doesn't know where to go from there. And here's what Job says. If one wished to contend with him, that is with God, he could answer him 1 time out of 1,000. For he could not answer him 1 time out of 1,000. For he is not a man as I am, that I may answer him, and that we should go to court together. Nor is there any mediator between us who may lay his hand on us both. Now this is a very important point in Job's experience. He's asking for somebody to be a go-between. He's asking for somebody who can bargain, as it were, or argue between him and God. He's asking for somebody who has enough spiritual discernment to be able to meet his needs and also talk to God, because right now he and God are at odds with each other and he doesn't know what to do. As a matter of fact, he says there, if anyone wished to contend with him, he couldn't give an answer 1 in 1,000. In other words, if he asked me 1,000 questions, maybe I could answer one of them, maybe not. So Job is to the point where he feels like he can't talk to God and he needs somebody to come along. Now this is a very important point in the book of Job, because this is the key point as to what happens later on in the book. All right? Job is asking for a mediator. Verse 1 of chapter 10. My soul loathes my life. I give free course to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Show me why you contend with me. God, tell me what's wrong. What did I do wrong? I'm open. Please tell me why I'm getting all of this, okay? And so Job is seeking an answer, but he can't find somebody who can mediate. And Bildad runs out of answers immediately. Bildad doesn't know what to say after this. And then there's Zophar, the legalist, okay? Chapter 11, and the first thing that Zophar says is, should not the multitude of words be answered, and should man full of talk be vindicated? Should your empty talk make men hold their peace, and when you mock, should no one rebuke you? For you have said, my doctrine is pure, and I am clean in your eyes. But oh, that God would speak and open his lips against you, that he would show you the secrets of wisdom, for they would double your prudence. Know therefore that God exacts from you less than your iniquity deserves. So this is a real encouraging statement, isn't it? Zophar says, you think you've got it bad off? You should have it 10 times worse off. You're the dirtiest sinner that there is. He jumps on him and lashes at him. As a matter of fact, Zophar just beats him up throughout the book. So here's Job. He's got these 3 friends. He's got Eliphaz the mystic. He's got Bildad the traditionalist. And he's got Zophar the legalist. And these represent, in a real sense, these represent people many times like you and me. And I'd like us to think about each one of those, because we can learn some lessons from these 3 guys as to what not to do. Okay, that's the first lesson I think that comes across in the book of Job, is what not to do when somebody's in trouble. Okay, when somebody's in trouble, don't do this. First of all, Eliphaz the mystic, his experience has shaped his thinking rather than godly teaching. Okay, his experience is what he's going on. He's had this dream, this vision, and that has transformed him. The biggest problem, and I honestly can say this, your experience is good, but when you have something happen to you that you were not prepared for in any way, you better be ready to handle it. Becky and I never, ever thought that what has happened to us would happen. We never dreamed it. And so going into it, there wasn't any planning we could have done for this. And in the same way, if you're relying simply upon your experience of life, as rich or as poor as it may be, it's not enough. What we experience in life is helpful, but it's only helpful through the lens of God's teaching in the Word and understanding what God says. And the other thing, this is the charismatic approach. The charismatic approach, but the thing is, the charismatics are not the only ones that do it. They kind of major on it. Their experience is everything. But I've met many non-charismatic Christians who have the same problem. They're just basing their life on experience. So experience is not enough. It's very interesting to see Eliphaz. He's quick to praise and quick to condemn. Look at Job chapter 4. I want you to see these two passages right side by side. Job chapter 4, verses 3 and 4. Job is talking to Eliphaz in his first speech, and he says this in Job 4, 3 and 4. Surely you have instructed many, and you have strengthened weak hands. Your words have upheld him who is stumbling, and you have strengthened the knees, the feeble knees. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Sounds like Job's been a great guy. But let's turn over to chapter 22 now, and look at verses 5 through 7. This is the same guy, and here's what he says. Job 22, 5 through 7. Is not your wickedness great and your iniquity without end? For you have taken pledges from your brother for no reason and stripped the naked of their clothing. You have not given the weary water to drink, and you have withheld bread from the hungry. Are we talking about the same person? One chance he talks really nice, and a short while later he lambastes him all over the place. And this is, I think, something that we see with people who don't have a solid basis on the Word of God. They're quick to jump to conclusions one way or the other. And we need to be very careful as Christians not to follow this kind of example where we're quick to praise and quick to condemn. And he falls finally into the trap of judging the heart and condemning Job, just like everybody else. When they get to the end, they're all basically, the three friends are all on the same side judging Job. Then there's Bildad, the traditionalist. And Bildad starts out well, okay? And he relies on the wisdom of past generations, which is a good thing. All right? He doesn't know what to say when questioned further. Okay? In other words, he gets the right answers on the quiz, but when you turn to the next quiz, he doesn't know what to do. And I think it's important for us to realize that just knowing pat answers is not enough. Many times we can say things that are true, but are not ultimately what people need to know. We need to find out what people really know. He again falls into the trap of judging the heart and condemning Job. So he falls into the same place again. Hey, I just noticed the clock says it's 5 minutes to 6. So we can go till 7:30 or 8, you said, right? Okay, just kidding. Okay, Zophar, the legalist. This is a man with a hard-hearted approach to Job from the start. He's better than he is, and he wants to make sure he knows it. Condemnatory, vitriolic language. He just castigates him. He's argumentative. And he pulls the other two friends into his condemnatory attitude. And this is the thing that you finally see, is that by the time the three friends have finished their speeches, they're all on Zophar's side. And they're all telling Job what a rotten person he is. And they've lost whatever benefit they had to begin with, and they're all axing Job as much as they can. We reach the impasse then at chapter 32. The beginning of chapter 32 is an impasse. And there are many detailed arguments back and forth for several chapters. And since It isn't really 6 o'clock, almost. It's almost 7. We're not going to go through all of those, but I would like to recommend that you read the book of Job and see how these guys argue back and forth. One of the things I did early on when I was really learning about the book of Job was I read each one of these guys, all of their speeches together, so I could get an idea of what this guy was like. I read all of Eliphaz's speeches. I read all of Bildad's speeches, and I read all of Zophar's speeches, and I said, what's this guy like? And it really hit me. It gave me an understanding of where these guys were coming from and what kind of people they were. And so there's a lot of other things in there we won't go through. They all three fail in the most important thing, and that's listening instead of talking. When people are in trouble, they need people to listen more than anything else. You don't want to give answers too quickly, because you don't know enough until they really open up and begin to share what they're really thinking. How important it is to listen. There are 3 cycles of speeches back and forth, and the third cycle, Zophar gets left out. He doesn't deserve it anyway, so he gets left out in the third cycle. And then Job concludes with a discussion-stopping speech of 6 chapters. Job launches into his defense of himself, and he goes for 6 chapters without anybody interrupting him, and he's going to finish everything off. And he ends up saying, if God, I know I'm right, and I know I'm doing the right thing, and nobody should stop me. And then, so these 3 men ceased answering Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. And that's the judgment, not of the men, but of the writer of the book. And so there's the impasse. They think he's a dirty dog, and he thinks he's perfect, or close to it. And so we reach this impasse, this tremendous struggle between the forces against him and what Job really thinks. And then along comes Elihu. Okay, Elihu is a younger man. Don't give up, guys. It's all right to be young, okay? He did not speak at the beginning. He wasn't even introduced. He just listened. All he does is he sits there and listens to everything everybody says for all this time, which is really interesting. And he hoped the older men would be able to help. Look at Job 32, 11 through 16. Here's what he says about the old guys. And since I'm an old guy, I can read it and take note. All right, here's what he says. Job 32, 11. Indeed, I waited for your words. I listened to your reasonings while you searched out what to say. I paid close attention to you, and surely not one of you convinced Job or answered his words. Lest you say, we have found wisdom, God will vanquish him, not man. Now he has not directed his words against me, so I will not answer him. They are dismayed and answer no more. Words escape them, and I have waited because they did not speak, because they stood still and answered no more. So Eliphaz has the patience to wait until everybody else is run down and all the arguments are laid to rest with no solution. And then he starts speaking. But he wished these guys could have said something. He says, I keep sitting there waiting for you to do something and nothing's happening. Okay. Elihu's conclusion, however, is very important. Then the wrath of Elihu, the son of Barachel the Buzite of the family of Ram, was aroused against Job. His wrath was aroused because he justified himself rather than God. Very critical thing there. He justified himself rather than God. And against his 3 friends his wrath was aroused because they had found no answer and yet had condemned Job. So Job's justifying himself, and these guys are condemning him, but they can't prove it. They can't figure out how to prove it. So there's this impasse. And so Elihu starts in. And Elihu and God, Elihu is the mediator that Job was looking for. Elihu's name means he is my God. And Elihu spends 6 chapters telling how great God is and what he can do. He doesn't even talk about Job. He just talks about God. And it's interesting because he takes 6 chapters, which kind of answers the echo of Job's 6 chapters of self-justification. So Job justifies himself for 6 chapters, and then Elihu justifies God for 6 chapters, or just talks about the great. And God takes up where Elihu leaves off. Nobody interrupts Elihu, but God starts talking. God speaks to Job out of the whirlwind. it says, in chapter 37, I think it is. Let's see. No, 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. So there's this whirlwind that comes up, and God is speaking to him out of it. God questions Job severely, showing the limits of what Job knows and what he can do. Here's what God, right in the middle of these chapters, here's what God says to Job. He says, now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Would you indeed annul my judgment? Would you condemn me that you may be justified? Have you an arm like God, or can you thunder with a voice like this? Then adorn yourself with majesty and splendor, and array yourself with glory and beauty. Disperse the rage of your wrath. Look on everyone who is a proud, and humble him. Look on everyone who is a proud, and bring him low. Tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together. Bind their faces in hidden darkness. Then I will also confess to you that your own right hand can save you. So God's pretty direct with Job. He says, you can't begin to do the things that I have to do in my job. And so God speaks to him. And this is a picture from the Middle Ages of Job speaking and God speaking to him. That's a whirlwind there. But I'd like to point out to you something. That doesn't look like a whirlwind, I know, but that's what it is. God speaks to us out of the whirlwind of our lives. How many of you have had a whirlwind in your life? You know, just like God speaks to Job in the out of the whirlwind of our own lives, God has a message for us, and he's going to talk to us. He wants us to know things. And the message of Job is a message that has been around for centuries and will be for a long time. Why do the godly suffer? Why do people who are godly suffer? C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Problem of Pain, in which he talks about this very question, the whole issue. It's a very, very important book. James Dobson wrote When God Doesn't Make Sense, which again is addressing the same question. And something that I've come across, I can't actually figure out where I quoted it from or if I made it up myself, but this is what I would say is the message of Job. Faith in God is better than an explanation. Faith, we don't have enough brains to understand everything right now, and probably will not this side of eternity. But our faith is much more powerful than our intellect. Our faith is the main thing. Faith in God is better than an explanation. Job never found out about why Satan did what he did. He didn't know those things. He does now. Explanation is good and helpful, but it's not as powerful as faith. James talks about the patience of Job. My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You have heard of the perseverance of Job and seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. Now, I will be honest with you, when you read the book of Job, you don't think of Job as a patient person. He gets right irritated at times, and he loses it sometimes too. But the issue is, there are two different words in Greek for patience. And I like to say, one of them is the patience of disciplining a child. You hope that sooner or later this works and something good comes out of it. The other is the patience of the dentist's chair. You hope this will be over pretty soon, okay? So there's two different kinds of patience. There's the patience that knows what it should be and you wait for it. And then there's the patience that says, I know this is not right, but it's going to last, okay? So we have to have both. And Job had both. He endured. Whatever else happened, as many footsteps of mistake he makes along the way, and he does make some. He makes some pretty bad blunders along the way. He came out at the right place. He endured until God gave him the right answer. And he got the answer from God. In other words, he stayed with it. And so the problem is that we need knowledge. We think knowledge is everything. Look at 1 Corinthians 8, 1 through 3. Now, concerning things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. And if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. Remember that the next time somebody thinks you're an expert. Okay? But if anyone loves God, this one is known by him. In other words, God's knowledge of me is much more important than my knowledge of God. Knowledge is a problem sometimes. There's another passage, 1 Corinthians 13, if we're just turn over a few pages, and look at verses 8 through 12. Love never fails, but whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But now when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see in a glass darkly, the mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. So there's a problem with knowledge, and the simple fact is we will never have full knowledge this side of heaven. No matter how much we learn, we will always be incomplete. And so there's always going to be questions. All explanations are only temporary solutions, both past and future. I have many times, not a lot, but there are times in the Bible when we come across a phrase or words and we simply do not know fully what they mean. There are individual Hebrew words and individual Greek words that the meaning of those words have been somewhat lost, and we're not sure exactly what they mean. And so all explanations are only temporary. And I tell translators sometimes, I say, this is my best guess on what that means. I don't know for sure, but this is what I think we should use. And so we go that way. But the problem is that all explanations are only temporary. Job said a lot of stupid things, not as many as his friends, and along with many wise things. He said a lot of things that he at one point said, God has wronged me. And he said a lot of other things, but eventually he said this, therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. He finally figured it out, but maybe he should have kept his mouth shut on certain things. Okay, that which is perfect is coming. It's not here yet, but it's coming. And as long as, and our faith is the thing that holds on to that. Our mind doesn't. We can't. Our mind will not grasp that. We won't have it up here, but we can have it in our faith as a promise from God what is coming. So our faith can hold on to what our knowledge and mind cannot. What should we be doing? More justifying God, less justifying ourselves, and less condemning others. That's one of the biggest lessons I can see from the book of Job. More justifying God, trusting and justifying what God does. Less justifying ourselves and less condemning others. And we need to be made mediators like Elihu. We need to be the kind of people who can help somebody in trouble by being a mediator between them and God in one way or another. That's the marvel that I see about Elihu, is he dug in and helped Job in a way that nobody else could. He actually understood the problem because he stepped back and watched it develop and saw all the details, and when he knew he could begin, he started. He didn't start until then. And then we need to listen more and say less. Let every man be swift to hear, slow to answer, slow to anger. That's the scripture says that. Hearing, listening. People need listening. And sometimes they need more than that, but they need first to be listened to. And sometimes you get more than you need. I know that. But that's part of the bargain. That's what a mediator does. I've been trained in conflict resolution and mediation. And one of the things that you always do in mediation is you wait until you have all the information before you say anything. You collect information over and over again from people, and you find out what people are saying before you jump to a conclusion. For we through the Spirit eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision or uncircumcision avails anything, but faith working through love More love, more faith, more hope. These things are powerful. Faith, love, and hope. Suffering, now this is just a caveat, this is just a little warning. Suffering, unlike for Job, may be a consequence of our own failure, and we should never forget that. We should always recognize that we may be in trouble because we did something really stupid ourselves, or we did something even ungodly, or we did something that is very displeasing to the Lord. We have to take those things into account, but many times what we really need is resiliency, perseverance, and endurance in suffering rather than surprise. Too often we're surprised by it. And you know, I've often said this, if being a Christian meant there were no more problems, everybody would want to be one for the health insurance. You know, suffering is going to come. Difficulties are going to come. Always seek to let suffering purify you and draw you close to God. So the Lord blessed the latter end of Job more than the beginning. Okay? This is another William Blake drawing here. And that's our blessing. Those are our 3 grandchildren we're taking care of. And I have to realize this as a blessing. It's been demanding, but ultimately having these 3 little kids in our home and in our lives has been a tremendous blessing. Verity's got her grandfather all figured out. And he knows it and likes it. So, Job has a lot of lessons to us, for us to learn. A lot of things that we can dig in on and find out about. I might mention a couple things about the book of Job. It is difficult to read because poetry in Hebrew is very repetitive. It's got a lot of repetition in it, and so it's sometimes hard to follow the full thought, because you lose the track of what's being said. You've got to concentrate and read more than once, okay? Also, a more modern translation may help you more. Okay, there are some good translations that are modern translations that can help you. Okay, and the other thing about it is you have to remember these are real people, really experiencing troubles. Job really went through these things, and he really had big questions. And these 3 guys, really didn't help him very much. And so this book is about an amazing experience of somebody getting to talk to God and not getting the explanation that he wanted. Job never got the explanation, but he did get a mediation between him and God, and he actually got to the place of realizing more about God than he ever knew before. And so if trouble brings us closer to God, it's worth it. And may God help us to endure what happens and follow him faithfully. Pastor.
Thank you for that, Brother Kerr, and what an encouragement and a challenge that was. It's been said that a message that's preached from up here, it's not really as powerful until it's already touched the heart of the one speaking it. I think it's clear tonight that it has. And how much more powerful does that make it, that it's a truth that's been lived out in his life, and it's a truth about God that he has found to be with him and consistent and steady. And may we also find that as well. And may we trust in faith more than an explanation. Let's pray as we close. Dear God, thank you for the opportunity to have Glen Kerr here with us. Thank you for his work and ministry, what you are doing through his life and his wife. And I just thank you for your work, and I thank you for what you have been able to do through him in these 25 years and for their faithfulness. I just pray that you would give them strength and courage in the difficulties of their life and the struggles that they have been faced with, but yet We thank you that you have blessed through that and for the comfort that you give to them. And I just pray that you would help us to realize the truths of Job in our own lives, in our own situations, and that we would trust in you, not in ourselves and not in any type of human explanation. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. You are dismissed.